Kinnock. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and many thanks to our panel for some really insightful analysis and views today. I just wanted to ask you to do maybe a bit of blue skies thinking. I know that might be slightly unusual for this sort of session, but we are in uncharted waters. So I suppose my point is this, that the West, so to speak, is facing a suite of very, very serious challenges. We have the rise of China. We have an increasingly authoritarian Russia. We have the possibility of the two-state solution being destroyed through annexation in the West Bank. We have chaos in Libya, just a few of the huge geopolitical challenges that we face. And it strikes me that whatever happens in the trade talks between the United Kingdom and the European Union, there is surely a need to protect the security of our citizens right across Europe, which is the first duty of any government, or indeed any collection of governments. So given that, I wondered whether I could ask each of you to just sort of take a minute to sketch out what you think a new mechanism of coordination between the UK and the EU might look like, just setting aside the questions about the trade talks and how if they go badly wrong, that could contaminate the broader dialogue. Let's just sort of hope that leaders will nevertheless realize the vital importance of coordination and dialogue across the EU and the UK. What would that mechanism look like to you? How do you think it could work? Is there a possibility of a kind of enhanced observer status, some sort of associate status for the UK to ensure that the UK is invited to some of these vitally important geopolitical discussions? How might that look? I don't mind, perhaps starting with Professor Chalmers.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting question. I think, in my view, it's going to be hard to get an agreement anytime soon for the UK to have a quasi associate status in relation to the EU Foreign Affairs Council. And I think that's partly because of UK concerns about sovereignty and not wanting to feel bound by an agreement in the Foreign Affairs Council. But I think it's just as much because European Union member states would fear that a UK in the room, even if we don't have a vote, it would unduly shape the discussion in a direction which would weaken the authority of member states and indeed blur the distinction between being a member state and not. So I don't think looking at that overarching framework is the most productive way to go ahead. Rather, I think we need to think of a range of other arrangements which can achieve a similar impact. First of all, of course, NATO is a key overarching framework for defense issues. It doesn't cover every foreign policy area, but it is an important overarching framework. And then within that, we have, of course, the Joint Expeditionary Force on the military side, which allows the UK to very close cooperation with 7 EU member states as well as Norway. And we have the combined Joint Expeditionary Force with France operationally ready this year. And I suspect one of the ways forward could well be to develop the foreign security policy aspect of JEF on the one hand, although there are some sensitivities there, I think, from the EU states, but those are the states in the European Union with whom we're often closest in a range of issues. And also, I think that the UK-France relationship is already a close one, and that could become closer. And alongside that, then, of course, the E3 is a really important mechanism for mutual shaping of policy whenever there's a crisis, even when there's not, and there's always some sort of crisis, all the issues you've talked about, Mr. Kinnock, are ones where there will be very frequent exchanges between those three countries at ministerial level, political director level, regional director level, and so on, and complementing the Quad, which I talked about earlier. There have been some suggestions from, particularly from President Macron, about a European Security Council, and I know there's been a lot of discussion around that to try and understand what the nature of that proposal is. At present, it doesn't feel as if it's going anywhere because the French really haven't specified what it means, and you'd have to specify how that related to the European Union mechanisms. But I think we should continue to talk. Look, I think that a lot of this will depend on the United States. The primary reason why foreign and defense policy cooperation in Europe is intergovernmental, why in the 1950s the European community didn't go in a different direction in relation to foreign defense policy, is because the US is the leader on defense policy in particular, but foreign policy in general to a large extent. And it's a backstop if Europeans don't agree with each other. If the US were to, if you ask for blue sky thinking, if the US will become more and more absent and less reliable in relation to security challenges in the European neighborhood, in North Africa or Turkey or whatever it might be, if that were to happen, there would be a risk of more nationalization of policy amongst European states, including within the European Union. You can see that in relation to Libya, where different states are going in different directions. But the result isn't likely to be anarchy. I think it's likely to be more one where there's more focus on a concert of major powers in Europe, which at the core of which is likely to be the E3, but others may be brought in some issues, Italy, for example, in relation to the Mediterranean. And the role of the EU as an institution perhaps will become less. But it's also possible, of course, under a different American president, the US will become more engaged in multilateralism in Europe and will go. It won't be the same as it was before because the challenges are different, but there'll be more of a sense of the Americans being prepared to act as a leader, and therefore, as we've seen in a number of issues, even under the Trump administration, pushing people in a particular direction. So I think that's. I think we are in a worrying position on a whole range of issues. The rise of major competition in relation to China and Russia is very evident indeed. I think the prospects of, I suppose my gloomy prognosis would be that if we were to move to a situation in which the Americans pivoted to Asia to such an extent that Europeans had to take more responsibility for their backyard, greater European cohesion it cannot be taken for granted by any means.
Thank you very much, Professor Whitman. Ms. Gavas, did you want to add anything on that?
If I may, just a little bit. An observation, first of all, is that with the UK leaving or having left the EU, that means that three large European states, UK, Russia, and Turkey, are outside the EU rather than within the EU orbit, and that does raise questions about the architecture and arrangements for managing European security and for European diplomacy. And I think, being frank, the EU and particularly other member states haven't quite yet come to grips with the consequences of Brexit in those kinds of terms. And I think there's been a bit of a paucity of thinking in other EU state capitals, and which is why ideas like the European Security Council that Malcolm raised have come out sort of malformed, I think, or haven't really had much by way of a diplomatic push behind them. And I think that those kind of discussions are going to have to happen sooner rather than later, and we're going to have to find some kind of mechanism for that higher level interaction, because other forums such as NATO, for example, because of the number of states involved, doesn't really allow perhaps for that kind of thinking, and the transatlantic relationship may well be complicated, again, for the reasons that Malcolm has suggested. And just two thoughts really to add. The E3, I think, is certainly a very interesting proposition and makes a lot of sense. And the colleagues at Chatham House, we're putting out a report in a couple of weeks, which looks at the possibilities for the UK of using the E3 because it's there to be used, and I think it could be used in a more effective way. Second point is that I think that all of the arrangements that the EU has offered so far in the context of the Brexit negotiations have been pretty poor in their thinking about how you accommodate a state like the UK. I mean, they've essentially thought about the UK as a standard third country along the lines of a Norway type deal, if you like, with the UK for foreign security and defence policy cooperation. And the EU's been very reluctant to think about the UK along the lines that it does the United States, which is, there's a kind of higher level, broad, overarching declaration that covers the relationship. But a lot of the nitty gritty actually happens on a day-to-day basis, on an intensive basis, outside of the arrangements that the EU has cooperation on third countries. So I think the UK is a key part of the jigsaw in terms of how we're going to manage the diplomatic order in Europe. And it will obviously be for the UK, and perhaps we'll see more of that through the integrated review, but also for other European states to think a bit harder about how they see the UK fits, where there is, of course, so much by way of shared interests.
Thank you very much.
Thank